Hello and welcome to our ongoing coverage of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Technology and defense cooperation, the need for dialogue and diplomacy, and an invocation of democratic values at the US Congress. That has been the central theme of Prime Minister Modi's state visit to the United States. The two nations have inked some crucial deals which will bolster their partnership further. Discussions on technology cooperation figured prominently in discussions between the two leaders. India and US identified at least 25 areas for tech partnership. Both Modi and Biden urged officials to address regulatory hurdles and emphasized on the need to put in place trusted sources in critical and emerging technology. US-based semiconductor company Micron will set up a semiconductor assembly and testing facility in Gujarat. Micron, central government and Gujarat will together invest $2.75 billion. Along with this, Applied Materials will invest $400 million in a semiconductor innovation center. Lam Research will train 60,000 Indian engineers in semiconductor fabrication. In the artificial intelligence space, US and India have launched a $2 million grant program for joint development and commercial applications of artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. To take this discussion forward, I'm now joined by Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies, R. Chandrashekhar, former Telecom Secretary and former President of NASSCOM. We're also joined by former Ambassador Secy, Ellen Nakashima, National Security Reporter at The Washington Post. Ellen, if I can begin with you first, what is the Biden administration exactly trying to achieve from this engagement with India? There has been some intense negotiation over the last few days. There have been deliverables across technology sectors. What is the US looking to achieve here?
So yes, there have been a series of deliverables announced in recent days, but at a high level, the Biden administration is seeking to showcase what they are calling the most consequential bilateral relationship in the world, the most important bilateral relationship on the global stage. They're really making an investment in India for the long term, continuing efforts begun by previous administrations. But this is really a signal effort by the Biden administration to showcase, lift up, as they say, this partnership that they hope and believe will pay dividends in the decades to come in trade, economy, and perhaps most importantly, in a sense, security and defense. The unspoken subtext here is China.
Right.
And while there was not a lot of explicit mention, while there was not explicit mention of China, especially by Prime Minister Modi, is quite understood that that China is the most significant adversary for India at the moment with its conflict and clashes on the border. And of course, for the United States, it is the significant pacing challenge going forward. And thus, the US sees India as a pivotal partner in countering China, not necessarily directly militarily if there's ever, for instance, an invasion of Taiwan by China, but rather in creating another power that can defend the values of sovereignty and openness in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific, and help serve as a bulwark to an increasingly assertive China in the region.
All right. Ambassador Secy, if I can get you in at this stage, India has always wanted to be a leader in terms of new and emerging technologies, play a big role in global supply chains, but the technology part was really missing. We needed technology support. Do you think with the engagement this week, any hurdles to that technology partnership with India, do you think that has been removed? Do you think there has been a breakthrough in the partnership?
Look, it's been incremental. This is, I think, the apex of what started in 1998. May of 1998, a quarter century ago, we touched the lowest point when we tested nuclear devices in May of 1998. There were sanctions and US went ballistic and all kinds of threats were posed. From there, we have climbed up step by step. And the world has changed. Geopolitical compulsions are there, and it's already been mentioned. Probably what has finally moved US in this direction is their realization that in terms of India's size, its economy, it's the only countervailing factor in Asia which can weigh and balance China. Now, interestingly, during the joint press meeting of the two leaders, when a question was asked, Wall Street journalist asked President Biden that, do you stand by your comment that President Xi is a dictator? He did not roll it back. It was very significant. And the impression you got is, I think he wanted to convey to India that Blinken's visit to Beijing seemed to give an impression that America was softening on China. President Biden was sending a signal that no, that is why he made the distinction between democracies. The relationship will always be different than we'll have with China. I think it was reassuring India in that. And then, of course, the joint statement takes it a step further. It's strategic convergence is the fourth subheading. The three subheadings leading to it are technology, defense, and clean energy. Now, these are all the building blocks of the future. This is all critical and emerging technologies where India needs to go if it has to abide by the Paris Agreement. We need development, but we also want clean energy. We also need new supply chains, and that's where semiconductors come in. So US is reconfiguring supply chains, and at the back of it all is China, and the Chinese would have got that signal. And I think it's a great opening for India. But the final thing is the strategic convergence. Russia is the big elephant in the room. It's not named. It's only indirectly referred to as a rule of law to be observed, sovereignty, territorial integrity. So the only difficulties we may have in the future is not between India and US. Depends how the Ukraine war goes, depends how US relationship with China goes, how China behaves in the Indo-Pacific. But otherwise, it's a great opening for India and the US.
Right. Mr. Chandrashekhar, if I can get you in, you've dealt with the tech industry in India and the United States as the president of NASSCOM earlier. I would like to ask you about the pushback that you have seen from the industry when it comes to policy in India, in the United States. To what extent those regulatory differences, those differences in export controls, to what extent have they been ironed out across certain priority sectors in technology?
Well, Parikshit, I think that this in this whole joint statement, what we see is a tremendous amount of depth, breadth, and intensity in technology cooperation. Technology figures front and center of this joint statement, and it covers, most importantly, defense and clean energy in its sweep. So the new technologies, it's particularly important in the new and emerging technology space that these two areas, particularly defense, is also covered, because a lot of the sensitive technologies, a lot of the dual-use technologies, including things like AI, are also, emanate from defense collaboration. It's very difficult to talk about new and emerging technologies and keep defense completely out of it. So I think the signal here is that the US is choosing its partners. I think the term friendshoring was, put forward fairly recently, because, the technology sector is intensely global. And supply chains are global. A lot of the value addition is global. But what is happening now is, because of the present geopolitical environment, there's a lot of rebalancing that is happening. And it's no longer the case that supply chains are being looked at only from an economic and an efficiency point of view. They are being looked at from a reliability and a long-term partnership point of view. Apart from that, I think the fact is that this joint statement recognizes the depth of Indian and US collaboration in the tech space, particularly, the important role that Indian tech manpower is playing. We see a lot of references to skill development, joint programs in research, collaboration in innovation, and a lot of other things in which I think Indian tech manpower plays a significant role, not only in India, but in the US as well. On the alignment of policies, that itself covers many different sub-dimensions within policy. One is, of course, the policy restrictions at the US end in terms of restricting some sensitive technologies. But I think it's quite clear that now the US does lean towards India being their partner in terms of jointly working on strategic technologies. And I think there is little, again, doubt in my mind that this is certainly, the most important bilateral partnership in the technology sector. India has been known for its IT sector, but the efforts to build up the hardware sector, because without having a significant, base there, it will be very difficult for India to build a certain degree of both self-reliance as well as security. And that is again where the partnership with the US comes in, because both sides recognize that they have to choose their partners carefully and make their long-term bets. So all in all, I think this is a great augury, and I think it shows that both sides are willing to work at removing the barriers and moving forward from where we were, as Ambassador Casey Singh mentioned. Moving well beyond the challenges of the past.
Those are some important points. Okay, I'll come to you once again, Mr. Chandrashekhar, to take a cue from what you're saying. Let me also pose some questions to Raymond Vickery of CSIS. Mr. Vickery, I would like to ask you about the GHAL deal. How significant is this for defense manufacturing in India? What is the quantum of technology transfer, the fine print that we're actually going to get? Because India had sought 100% technology transfer. We hear what could come is 80% technology transfer over a 3-year period. And what does this mean for a defense industrial collaboration over 20 to 30 years?
Well, thanks for having me. I think it is very significant. This technology for the GE engines is something that has been one of the most closely guarded technologies of the United States, not even shared with some allies. So it's significant. What we have here, of course, is a convergence not only of strategic interests vis-a-vis China, but a convergence of technology and commercial interests along with the strategic. This partnership has been in the works really for a long time. You may recall that there was a controversy in the Trump administration about so-called foundational documents, which are the basis for being able to transfer, and required India to take on certain constraints in terms of how the technology would be used. So, as has been said by Ambassador Singh, this is an incremental kind of approach to U.S.-India relations. It's been going on really since before 1998, when India first opened up, did away with license Raj. So what you're seeing here is that the economic factor is a driver. It is not sufficient just to talk about this in terms of values or even a strategic interest. There are very strong commercial interests involved. And that really puts meat on the bones, if you will, of the U.S.-India relations. So it's been a great visit for U.S.-India relations, for democracy, and I would argue great for the economic and commercial relationship, which has underlined this for a number of decades.
All right. All right. On that note, we're going to take a short break, but we'll request all our guests, Mr. Chandrashekhar, Raymond Vickery, Ambassador Casey Singh, and Ellen Nakashima, to stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. We're tracking the Prime Minister's visit to the United States. We still have with us Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies, R. Chandrashekhar, former Telecom Secretary and former President of NASSCOM, former Ambassador Casey Singh, and Ellen Nakashima, National Security Reporter at the Washington Post. Ellen, do you get a sense that US here is somehow seeking support from India and trying to build India as a technological power, as a defense power against China in case of an invasion of Taiwan? In case things go south, is US expecting India's support? Also, will India be a treaty ally in future? Do you think there is work going on that front?
As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the Biden administration or the US government expects India to be a sort of treaty ally partner in military defense of Taiwan should there be an invasion by China. Look, it's clear that India will never. I won't say never, but it's highly unlikely will be a treaty ally of the United States. It aspires to be a great power in its own right. It guards its strategic autonomy and sort of sees itself as a leader or leading voice of what is called the Global South, the group of developing and emerging nations. But that said, the Biden administration recognizes that, and they say they appreciate it and they respect it, and they feel like there can still be a strategic partnership, even with India, protecting its strategic autonomy because of these interests in defense, in technology, economy going forward. These things align, and so there's they see it, no contradiction there.
All right. Ambassador Casey Singh, if I were to come to you in the run-up to this visit and even during the Prime Minister's meetings there in Washington, D.C. and New York, there were questions raised by the American press, American think tanks, politicians about India's record with human rights, treatment of minorities and democratic values. The Prime Minister did seem to address that to a great extent on the floor of the Congress. How do you think the Prime Minister's speech addressed all those concerns, and what would be the big takeaways for you from what the Prime Minister said?
Look, I think it'll take more than just a speech to address it. I don't think the concerns can simply be addressed by your words. They have to be by your actions. And I think it got a little complicated because President Obama gave an interview to CNN almost simultaneously as this was happening, and he was in Athens. And he was sharper in his criticism than President Biden was, because obviously President Biden didn't want to do it in public. He wanted to do it privately. Now, today we've had a BJP chief minister say some intemperate things about President Obama, and I think that is not the approach. And that would really embarrass the Prime Minister. Because what is required there, US is sending a message. And that's why at the beginning of the joint statement itself, they're talking of two democracies coming together. And I think US realizes that even their democracy is under threat. Because if you get Trump re-elected, they're not sure where US democracy will go. So the democracies all over the world, which are under stress. Now, if you have to address that, whether it is in Brazil or it's in Poland or it's in Hungary, then India and US have to be two stable democracies. And we cannot escape from it by saying, no, but it's humanism, it's humanity. Words are not going to address it. New York Times editorial board had a special article, and some of the members, according to New York Times, who were critical on this account, did not address prime ministers, did not attend prime minister's address. So there is this lurking, and President Obama was addressing that faction in the Democratic Party, which is agitated over this, that President Biden, by inviting Prime Minister Modi, has actually sidestepped from his commitments, is saying that he's going to have a conclave of democracies. But then it's a balancing, and that's what President Obama also said, that you have to balance your interests. He says that is why he dealt with China. That's why he dealt with Saudi Arabia. So it's a balancing of pragmatism and your value system. And I think this is what Biden is doing. But at the same time, India will continue to be in the middle of the, they'll be watching India carefully. And I think we have to know how to deal with it. And it can't be simply by denying it.
Right. Mr. Chandrashekhar, returning to you, both sides have announced task forces on advanced telecom, Open RAN, R&D in 5G and 6G. Both sides laid emphasis on trusted network, trusted sources in the bilateral network. Give us a sense of the importance of this thrust on trusted networks, trusted sources in the telecom sector. What are we really talking about and envisaging here?
I think here, first and foremost, Parikshit, is the recognition that telecom is the foundation on which the whole of the digital economy rests. And therefore, ensuring that the network is secure in the sense that it is not vulnerable to either individuals or states being privy to what goes on these networks, except in accordance with the law of the land. So that is one key aspect. And going forward, the 5G and 6G technologies will be the basis because they are bringing, greater capability, greater bandwidth. And along with that, arguably both higher security at one end and perhaps even additional security threats. So what is significant is both the collaboration in technology, including the open radio access networks. And that's important because the open networks allow different components from different sources to be joined together. And that has some influence on the competitive environment within that sector, which is important both from an economic as well as a technology standpoint. So I think that collaboration in the telecom space is particularly important. There's another aspect of this joint statement which I think is significant. And that is, the agreement to retain or encourage the current characteristics of the internet, being open, being allowing participation and so on. And that is because I think the recognition is that there is an intimate relationship also between the way the internet functions and democracies. And we've seen also the interplay between some of the technology platforms like social media and elections. And therefore, the course of democracies is also linked in some sense with the way technology moves forward. So I think preserving the foundation on which the digital economy rests, ensuring that digital artifacts are consistent with democratic norms and ideals of both countries, and trying to use them and converge them in a way to preserve democracy and democratic principles. That is particularly important. I just want to mention couple of other quick things. Right. One was the reference to artificial intelligence and recognizing that it is one of the most likely to be a defining technology of this century. And therefore, the collaboration in that space, again, is particularly important because AI is clearly now a dual technology, not only capable of civil and military use, but also capable of use for good as well as good for harm. And therefore, that collaboration with some of the same principles underlying it is something which is very significant. I also found the emphasis on digital public infrastructure.
Mr. Chandrashekhar, very quickly, do you think the US industry, the US government would have raised concerns on India's data protection laws, data localization, cross-border data flows? Would they have demanded transparency, long-term policy stability as far as the tech sector goes?
I'm pretty sure that everybody around the table, whether it is the US or India, does want clarity on the regulatory space. The challenge has been more in crafting regulation which takes into account all the various legitimate concerns. That has not been easy in India. It has not been easy in any country for that matter. And the fact is that the environment and the ecosystem in India is different from that in the US. And therefore, we see different styles of regulation in the US, in Europe, in China, and India will certainly have to look at it from its own point of view. So I think that is certainly a critical point that needs to be kept in mind.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chandrashekhar, for joining us. Thank you very much to Ellen Nakashima as well. And we are going to be taking a short break. I'll request Raymond Vickery to continue being with us. But let me thank Mr. Chandrashekhar, Ambassador Secy Singh, and Ellen Nakashima for joining us here on our program, giving us their views on Prime Minister's visit to the United States. Lots more coming up. Don't go anywhere.